Undercover boss orders breakfast at restaurant, but what the janitor says stops him in his tracks. A misty morning rain clung to the familiar diner window. Derek Langston, the head owner of Sunrise Diner, sat quietly in the corner, his old baseball cap pulled low over a face once known on the covers of service industry magazines. Today, he hadn't come to sign reports or give speeches at a management meeting. He came to listen to the whispers behind the counter, where frayed uniforms and muddy shoes were the daily norm. Amid the clatter of dishes and the smell of freshly baked pancakes, a janitor pushed a garbage cart by, leaving a few small streaks of water on the floor, and a quiet remark, as if only for the wind outside, "Here, the ones who work the hardest are also the ones who suffer the most." Derek was startled, his heart pounding, when Cassie the waitress, busy cleaning tables, glanced at him, her gaze carrying a warning. And at that exact moment, a single drop of rain from the awning fell on Derek's collar. Ice cold, just as he spotted Ryan, the morning shift manager, standing near the register with a sly smile. In that instant, Derek understood. This wasn't just a story about stolen tips or unfair shift assignments. It was a rotten system eating away at Sunrise Diner from the inside. Sunrise Diner branch number 28 was as busy as ever. Truck drivers sat alongside office workers grabbing breakfast, mingling with the aroma of freshly baked goods and black coffee. Once Derek's pride, the place now held something he couldn't quite name. Reports of high turnover and scattered complaints about the work environment forced him to set aside his CEO suit, put on an old flannel shirt, and pull down his baseball cap, pretending to be just another customer. He stepped through the glass door under the warm glow of the yellow light, sure that a few hours of observation would reveal the problem. But the moment he sat by the window, a laugh from the register caught his attention. Ryan, the morning shift manager, was chatting with a coworker, eyes full of mischief. Derek squinted. In that moment, he realized the problem wasn't just in the numbers on the reports or a few complaint emails. Something deeper, more insidious, was happening behind the kitchen counter, something that could destroy everything he'd worked so hard to build. Derek sat quietly in his window seat, his breath mixing with the scent of black coffee and fresh pancakes. From behind his sunglasses, he watched Cassie, the young waitress with neatly tied hair and a weary smile under tired eyes. She moved between tables like a misplaced dancer, deftly dodging curious glances and complaints. While two male coworkers stood laughing at the coffee station, Cassie kept working with a tray stacked higher than her head. Despite the heavy workload, she kept her smile, but the way her hands gripped the coffee pot betrayed a silent, deep fatigue. One by one, glances were exchanged between Cassie and Derek, the stranger named Walt Simmons, sparkling amidst the bustling noise of the diner. As she poured more coffee, Derek gently asked, his voice tinged with curiosity, "Busy morning today, huh?" Cassie bowed her head slightly, her voice barely audible. "Yes, especially when some people always get priority. I also have to share tips with them, but not everyone gets a fair share." Ew. Her eyes briefly darkened before returning to a professional expression. Derek nodded slightly, his heart sinking with suspicion. Just as Cassie left the table, a raspy voice from the garbage cart whispered the old janitor with silver hair, his voice like a broom sweeping the concrete floor. "Here, the one who works the hardest is also the one who suffers the most." Derek froze, his eyes suddenly meeting those of Ryan, the morning shift manager, standing near the register with a faint, calculating smile. At that moment, he realized this wasn't just about stolen tips, but a deeply entrenched injustice within Sunrise Diner, and Ryan might be the key to unraveling it all. Derek maintained his cover as a stranger, his eyes following every movement behind the counter where the brand-new POS system sat next to the coffee machine, supposedly proof of the modern efficiency the manager bragged about to the executive board. But the longer he watched, the clearer it became. The calculating looks between Doug and Ryan, the morning shift manager, who also happened to be Doug's nephew, every time a customer pulled out their wallet. The tips meant to motivate staff had become their private profit. One morning, as the crowd thinned, Derek noticed Cassie pulling a small notebook from her apron pocket. Numbers scrawled in shaky, thin strokes, densely packed. She had quietly gathered evidence for months, recording every stolen tip, every roundabout explanation from management. Cassie looked up, her eyes met Derek's for a second, then quickly lowered as she tucked the notebook away. In that glance, Derek saw both hope and the fear of retaliation. He realized she had done everything she could as a lowly employee. And in that moment, as Cassie stood by the counter, Ryan approached, tossing her a mocking look. "What you're writing down there, Cassie? Careful or you'll get fired." That half-joking, half-serious remark made Cassie freeze, her notebook trembling in her hand. Derek gripped his coffee mug tighter, his heart swelling with determination. This wasn't just about a few stolen tips. It was an entire corrupt system, deeply rooted in Sunrise Diner, threatening to choke the very people it was supposed to protect. Derek struggled to steady his breathing as Ryan walked away, wearing a triumphant smirk, leaving Cassie standing alone, her eyes reflecting a fear of exposure. In that instant, Derek understood. Ryan wasn't just a petty opportunist. He was the final link in a web of manipulation where money and power had overtaken honesty. From his seat, Derek watched the cash register counter, where Ryan and Doug often stopped by to check the POS system. He noticed that every time a customer left the diner, Ryan skillfully swiped his finger across the screen, entered a few numbers, and then glanced at Doug as if to confirm something unspoken. The tip display changed right after that, always showing less than what the customer had actually left. Derek's eyes darkened as he spotted yet another time when Ryan and Doug exchanged a small slip of paper tucked inside a receipt. Nearby, Cassie quietly cleared plates, her eyes briefly sad as she watched a regular customer leave. Derek noticed that customer often left generous tips, but when Cassie opened the tip drawer, only a few coins remained. She froze, her eyes glistening as if she were about to cry. Derek clenched his fist. The warm yellow lights of Sunrise Diner, once a symbol of trust and human kindness, now cast a murky glow over a space filled with schemes and greed. In that moment, Derek understood that he wasn't just dealing with a few tip thieves. He was standing before a far scarier truth. A decaying system was slowly tarnishing the dream he had poured his heart and soul into building. He bowed his head slightly, hiding the weight in his eyes, reminding himself, fairness doesn't happen on its own, it only exists when someone stands up and demands it. And he, Derek Langston, would be that person. That morning, rain pattered gently on the diner's awning, leaving droplets sliding down the glass windows. Sunrise Diner was as busy as ever, the smell of pancakes and coffee blending into a warm air, but inside, a storm was brewing. Derek Langston stepped through the glass door, his rain-soaked jacket clinging to him, his eyes sweeping the room. Doug and Ryan were standing next to the POS system, chatting and laughing, fingers deftly tapping the screen as if they held the place in the palm of their hands. He took off his old baseball cap, revealing the face of the CEO that everyone knew from the company bulletin board. The clink of spoon against plate suddenly fell silent. Cassie stood by the counter, gripping her cleaning cloth tightly, her eyes shining with a mix of hope and anxiety. Doug, Ryan. Derek's voice was deep but firm, echoing through the room of curious stares. I want you both to explain this. Doug and Ryan froze, their eyes darting around, visibly rattled. Derek pulled a thick stack of papers from his jacket pocket, the evidence Cassie had painstakingly collected for months, complete with photos of each tampered tip slip and every distorted figure in the POS system. This is what you've been doing behind my back, he said, his voice sharp, behind the backs of those who sweat every day to serve our customers. At that moment, Ryan let out a mocking laugh, his voice dripping with arrogance. What are you going to do to me? This is how we were taught to increase profits for the store. Or did you forget that you were the one who signed off on the new tip-sharing system? Derek froze for a moment, a cold jolt running down his spine. In the murmurs of customers and staff, he realized he himself had once approved the summary report on the POS system that Doug and Ryan had cunningly adjusted to turn it into a tool for skimming tips. He clenched his fists, his eyes blazing with righteous anger. I signed because I trusted you to do the right thing, not to turn it into a weapon against the good people here. And so, a round of applause erupted from the back of the diner, where Cassie stood, her eyes alight, a tear streamed down her cheek. Derek knew this moment wasn't just about punishment, it was about reclaiming justice for Cassie, for everyone who had always believed in the values of Sunrise Diner, and for his own heart. Doug stood frozen, his face shifting from confusion to fury. His hand gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white. Next to him, Ryan still wore his trademark half-smile, his eyes full of defiance. Profit is everything, Derek. If you don't accept that, Sunrise Diner will be just another dusty name in history. A murmur rose from the staff and customers, spreading like small waves across the diner. Derek looked at them, saw eyes filled with doubt and worry, but also a flicker of hope, like dying embers waiting for a strong wind to spark them back to life. He drew a deep breath, his voice thick with emotion but firm. I'd rather see Sunrise Diner slow down a little than let it be corrupted by greed and injustice. Me and everyone here will rebuild it from this very trust. Cassie stepped forward, her eyes trembling, her hand clutching the notebook. Behind her, other staff members began to stand, no longer silent shadows, but people with heads held high. Ryan sneered, but Doug could no longer maintain his composure. His face flushed red. His voice cracked. You'll fail. This system, it's the only way to survive. Derek looked Doug straight in the eye, his voice like wind sweeping through a storm. I'd rather fall for doing the right thing than survive by trampling on the people who built this brand. A hush fell, broken only by the steady drip of rain on the awning. Then a voice rose from the back of the diner, an older customer, hair gray, holding a coffee cup. That's the Sunrise Diner I remember. Applause erupted this time, not just from Cassie, but from everyone who had sat in silence waiting for someone brave enough to speak the truth. Derek met their gaze, his eyes shining with renewed faith. He turned back, pointing straight at Doug and Ryan, his voice resolute. You're both fired, and if you have any decency left, you'll leave now before I call the police. Doug opened his mouth to protest, but Ryan tugged at his arm, his face now stripped of all arrogance. The two figures hurried out of the diner under the scornful gazes of those around them. Derek exhaled, his shoulders feeling as if 100 pounds of burden had been lifted. Cassie's eyes sparkled, the tear still on her cheek, but now it was a tear of hope and justice. In that moment, Derek understood. Sunrise Diner wasn't just a restaurant, it was a family, a community, a place where justice, trust, and kindness had to be protected at all costs. The next morning, the rain had stopped and sunlight streamed through the glass windows of Sunrise Diner, illuminating the polished wooden counters and the neatly arranged tables. Cassie stood behind the counter, no longer wearing her old, worn-out apron, but instead a brand-new name tag gleaming brightly, Cassie Shift Manager. She smiled at Derek for the first time since he'd entered the diner in the guise of a customer. Her smile held no trace of worry, but rather radiated confidence and pride. Her gaze was no longer that of just a server, but of a young leader determined to uphold the values of a diner she considered family. Sunrise Diner buzzed with laughter, the clinking of spoons against porcelain cups, and the warm greetings between customers and staff. Tips were distributed fairly, with clear numbers on the POS screen ensuring everyone's peace of mind. Transparency had returned like a warm breeze after a long storm. Derek was about to leave to return to the office when Cassie called him back, her voice soft but firm. Boss, there's something I need to ask you. Derek turned back, his gaze softening. Cassie, what is it? Cassie lightly grasped her name tag, lifted her head, and looked Derek straight in the eyes. Will you continue to trust people like me? I know Sunrise Diner was built on humanity, but I'm afraid, one day, things might go back to the way they were. Derek paused, his heart skipping a beat. In her eyes, he saw his own reflection once young and trusting, and then having faced doubt himself. He nodded gently, his voice warm. Cassie, I promise. I will never allow anyone, not even myself, to make the same mistake again. Here, fairness will always be our guiding star. A round of applause erupted from the nearby staff, and Cassie's eyes sparkled like the sun after the rain. In that moment, Derek knew. Success wasn't just in revenue reports, it was in the trust shared between people building value together. And at Sunrise Diner, that value was no longer just a slogan, it had become the heartbeat of an entire community, where every smile and every thank you was cherished as the most precious gift.